A bill officially called the Parental Rights in Education and called by critics the Don't Say Gay bill was signed into law by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis on Monday, March 28th of 2022. The bill essentially bans schools from having classroom instruction on, quote, sexual orientation or gender identity in kindergarten through third grade, quote, in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. Supporters of the bill say it is meant to allow parents to determine when and how to introduce LGBTQ topics to their children and allows parents to sue a school district if the policy is violated. Critics explain that because the wording is so vague, it allows parents who want absolutely no discussion of LGBT topics to sue school districts, causing school districts to avoid LGBTQ topics altogether to avoid being sued. Critics also call the bill hateful and detrimental to LGBTQ student health. The Trevor Project reports that children who have spaces that affirm their identity, quote, report lower rates of suicide attempts, and that the bill, quote, erases LGBTQ identity, history, and culture as well as LGBTQ students. Students of Florida staged school walkouts in response to legislation. High school senior Jack Bataz was suspended indefinitely for handing out pride flags at the protest. Another part of this bill required school officials to disclose a child's sexual orientation to parents within 6 weeks if they had come out of school. After significant backlash, Representative Joe Harding, who made the amendment, withdrew it an hour before it was to be debated on the House floor. He claimed the, quote, exaggeration and misinterpretation was a distraction to the original bill. President Biden also spoke out against the bill, saying his administration will, quote, continue to fight for the protections and safety you deserve. I was shocked when I first heard the news about this bill. I feel it is important to teach children, especially young children, about people of all different backgrounds. LGBT families deserve representation, and LGBTQ children deserve to not hide their identities at school. The state-mandated outing of children was especially terrifying to hear about. For many LGBT people, school is the only safe space where they can express their true identity. State-mandated outing will cause children in homophobic households to be subject to severe psychological damage and abuse if a school district were to out a child to an unaccepting household. My initial reaction did change the more I learned about the bill. I went from initial shock and anger to concern for children and teachers who will be affected by this legislation. At first reaction, I was mainly concerned about the impact on children, but as time went on, I realized even teachers will be affected. LGBTQ teachers in Florida will be unable to share a huge part of their identity with their students and will not allow teachers who are allies to provide a safe space for LGBTQ students. One thing the viewers should know about my personal context is that I am a member of the LGBTQ community. I came out to my immediate friends and family in high school, and have been involved in LGBTQ events and spaces ever since. I'm very proud of my identity and it is a huge part of my personal self-concept. Learning about young children in my community being discriminated against and having their identities erased in the classroom makes me very discouraged and angry. LGBTQ people belong in educational spaces, and teaching children about them is the first step to teaching acceptance and giving children a better understanding of the world around them. Another aspect of my personal context is that my extended family is very conservative and homophobic. I'm so closeted to much of my extended family, and I could not imagine being outed to them. Being outed, especially to a homophobic family, is extremely psychologically damaging and will cause trauma and possible abuse to many young children if they are forcibly outed by Florida schools. I was out in school before I was with my family, and I know how important having that safe space is to build enough confidence and security to come out on your own terms. One core concept that this applies to is aversive bias. Aversion is when we make decisions based on implicit biases only when we can blame it on a non-biased reason. For example, many supporters of this bill argue that the purpose of the Parental Rights in Education bill was to allow parents to have more control over how and when to teach their children about LGBT people. This is an example of aversive bias because they are using an excuse to justify putting homophobic and transphobic laws into place without explicitly saying they are biased against the LGBTQ community. By asserting that the law is merely to give parents more control over what their child is taught in school, it others the LGBTQ community and erases them from classrooms. There are lots of actions people can do towards social justice for this recent event. Many organizations are filing lawsuits against Florida to protest the bill. The National Center for Lesbian Rights filed a suit in March just after the bill was signed, and on July 3rd, 3 civil rights groups filed a lawsuit on behalf of 2 Florida couples and their children. The lawsuit argues that the enforcement of this law, because it is so vague, quote, invites parents who oppose any acknowledgement of the existence of LGBT people to sue, resulting in schools acting aggressively to silence students, parents, and school personnel. Donating to any of these organizations or legal groups can help fight against the new bill. Another course of action anybody can take is to participate in protests or contact the representatives to push back against the bill.